Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and we now continue with our exploration of Asian horror. This video will focus specifically on 1996, another reliable year for the industry, I think. Almost all of these movies are from Japan, however, with only one from the Philippines. We're not seeing many contributions yet from South Korea or Thailand for the most part, but they will of course change significantly down the road. But don't worry, because Japan is certainly capable of carrying the load when necessary, and that's exactly what they did during 1996. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss are listed in the description box below. And we begin with the worst Asian horror film from 1996, and it's a fairly easy choice, I think. That is Are You Afraid of the Dark, also known as Takot Kabasadalim, Filipino horror film. Now in this film, some friends venture to a secluded cottage, which is always a great idea, but they encounter strange creatures and vampires. Now this begins, I kid you not, with almost 70 minutes of boring setup and filler material. As a viewer, you just kind of sit there, waiting for something to happen, and it really doesn't. Even worse, the horror scenes that follow are lame and not worth the wait at all. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say that about 95% of this movie consists of boring characters sitting around talking about boring stuff. At least that's what I remember from watching it. Obviously, I say skip this. It's like watching paint dry. There's really no other way to describe it. I say let's just move on. There's nothing more I can say about that movie. So the next film, while not quite as bad, is probably more disappointing. And that is Azarak 2, Birth of a Wizard, a Japanese thriller horror film. Now this is actually a prequel to the original film. And the story goes like this. An archaeologist discovers a mummy from a village of former wizards, but the spirit of the corpse comes alive, possesses an assistant, and is determined to find and murder our protagonist. But fortunately, a protector arrives to keep her alive. Now, that's not a bad premise. There's a lot of potential there for a fun ride. But, unfortunately, this film drops the ball. Since this is a prequel to the first Azarak film, one might expect some character development on how Misa obtained and developed her wizardry. Nope. That is not what you get here. Instead, we get a crappy Terminator ripoff with sorcery splashed in for good measure. Now, even this setup could have worked had it introduced some cool scenarios, but there's almost nothing worth remembering from this film, with the exception of a few bloody deaths near the beginning, and they're really not all that great. The entire second half of this movie is just unbearably tedious stuff, with its very drawn-out flashback and dialogue scenes. I remember there's one flashback scene that seemingly takes forever and is just excruciatingly dull. I had trouble staying awake while watching this movie. Again, the protagonist witch here is just a weak... She has very weak abilities, which was a problem that I had with the first film in this series, but the first film had some other stuff that kind of made up for it, because I did enjoy the first film in this trilogy. But, man, is this witch ever going to develop any useful witchcraft powers at all? Well, it's not in this film. In fact, after watching Azarak 2, I come away with a few questions, okay? Where are all of the schoolgirls? Where is the witchcraft? And where are the schoolgirls killing each other with witchcraft? Because that's kind of what you expect from this trilogy, and this film really just doesn't give you what you want. It's certainly not here, any of those things. I do not recommend this film. However, there are two reasons for you to watch this, okay? First, if you enjoyed the first film in the series, you may as well check this one out. And second, it does have a fairly good fan base on the internet, so maybe I'm missing something. I mean, some people like this one more than the other films in the trilogy, so all I can say is, every few years, for some reason I give this film another chance, and I rewatch it, thinking that I will somehow magically enjoy it more than I did from the last few times that I've seen it. And I always come away disappointed. Every single time. You know, you think of the premise and you're like, oh man, this movie should, at the very least, it should be kind of fun to watch. You know, a Terminator ripoff with witchcraft? No. It just, way too boring, actually. Which, you know, is the last thing a film like this could really be. So, I cannot recommend this. However, you know, it is widely available if you want to check it out. So, now we've reached the first Asian horror film from 1996 that I actually enjoyed. And that is All Night Long 3, the final chapter. And that is, of course, from Japan. Now, this third installment is sufficiently violent and mean-spirited, which is no surprise given the films that came before it. The plot basically involves youths who humiliate and commit acts of heinous violence against each other, which is essentially the same exact plot as the previous entries in this franchise. Now, this one does get a little nasty, of course. Not quite as nasty, I don't think, as the second installment, but the acting is about as good as the second installment, which is a pretty significant positive because, you know, the acting is a problem I had with the first film in the series. The second and the third films have some good acting, which is important for me in this particular franchise. I would have to say the third installment has enough positives and is a fairly enjoyable piece of nihilistic filmmaking, but only for a specific kind of viewer who can handle depraved cinema like this. I'd say if you enjoyed the first two films in the series, or even just the second one, this one is basically a no-brainer. Go out and watch it. Now, the DVD availability of All Night Long 3 is that, you know, as I mentioned in my previous videos, the entire trilogy is widely available in a box set. So if this is your type of thing, pick it up. Alright, so the next film here is a film called Don't Look Up, also known as Ghost Actress, a Japanese horror film. Now, while holding auditions during the pre-production phase of a movie, a group of filmmakers see odd images in their film reels that show a mysterious actress from an older film. Now, the production of this particular movie is consistently interrupted by strange occurrences, and the cast and crew begin to get spooked. So this is an early horror film by Hideo Nakata, the director of Ringu, and this is the first film from his filmography that we will cover in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist. Now, he did direct another film, a horror film before this one, at least one horror film before this one. The one that I'm aware of is a film called Cursed Death Spirit from 1992, a film which I inexplicably have never seen. You know, I've seen it available on Amazon. I think I may have read some not-so-great reviews on it, so I kept waiting for it to be available to rent on DVD. Never happened, so I guess I just have to bite the bullet and buy the DVD at some point. Now, just as an FYI for this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist, you know, as we get closer to the present day, what I'm going to do is perhaps add an appendix, a few appendices in this playlist. So, say I watch a few Japanese horror films from like the 70s, 80s, or 90s after I cover those years. Well, I could just group those together, add an appendix video on, and just cover all the movies that I didn't cover before because I saw them after I made the video for that particular year. So just an idea I had for this playlist. So, you know, if we get closer to the present day, don't worry, there's going to be plenty more content for you to enjoy here. So, in the case of Don't Look Up, it has a few similarities to Ringu with its use of creepy film footage. The ghost girl, you know, with the hair over her face does arrive, but she's a little bit different from Sadako because she's presented a little bit, I guess you could say, with a little bit more humanity to her. And she also has a crazy sadistic laugh, which I quite enjoyed. That definitely sets this ghost apart a little bit. Something interesting there. And since the story for this film actually takes place during the production of a motion picture, it gives us a slightly different angle that's also quite interesting. Kind of a film within a film type aspect. So I say Don't Look Up is worth a look. Pun intended. So the DVD availability on this one is that it's unfortunately difficult to find. A lot of Nakata's films you can find. This one is a little bit more difficult to find. I'm almost certain I watched it on YouTube, so keep checking on YouTube. It might pop up again. And remember, it's also known as Ghost Actress, so check both titles when you're researching this. Alright, the next film here is another good one, and it is called Night of Bodies Model. Kind of an odd title, but it is another horror film from Japan, of course. So in this one, a pretty lady moves into an apartment complex with weirdos in neighboring residences in this film by our good friend Hisayasu Sato. So since it's a Sato film, you can expect it to be a little weird, and this one is. Now, one apartment in this complex has a guy who eats raw meat and intently listens in through the wall on the woman's activities. Another apartment has a one-armed old man and his perverted son. Well, it sounds like a real friendly neighborhood. Now, this film, like a lot of Sato's other films, is quite atmospheric and moody, which is always a positive for me. I'm a big fan of that. It also has kind of a low-budget grittiness to it. The horror elements are a bit odd and bizarre, as they involve synchronized dreams, odd food fetishes, and some sexual fetishes as well. And of course, since it's a Sato film, you're certainly in for something a bit different. You know, the film itself just feels a little bit different from a lot of the other horror films you would typically see. However, unlike something like Naked Blood, the violence is quite limited here. So Sato doesn't go all out on the violence in this one. More of kind of a creepy, oddball type horror film, but I definitely enjoyed it. It's a good flick. Unfortunately, similar to Don't Look Up, Night of Bodies Model just is difficult to find. But put it on your list if you like Sato stuff. Alright, the next film here is even more of an oddball film, I think. Man, those Japanese, I'll tell you. It's a film called Organ, a Japanese horror thriller hybrid. Yeah, this one's a weird one. Now, a policeman investigates a group of underground black market human organ dealers, which is a pretty, I wouldn't say generic premise, but it's a pretty common premise. But the weirdness in this film is all generated from the style and the direction. So this film really, when you watch it, you could tell it attempts to take Japanese splatter films and modify those films to include more surrealism. And I would say that it's a success for the most part, with some very weird moments and some very effective scoring. Now, I have to give this film credit because it's certainly odd enough to be different, and the overall style is bizarre enough to be memorable. And actually, it reminded me a bit of that guinea pig film entitled Mermaid in a Manhole, because Organ uses like a rampant quantity of bloody wounds and pus. You know how Mermaid in a Manhole had that mermaid that had just constant pus and flesh wounds, and it's just like they're like exploding on her, and it's all gooey and disgusting. That's what Organ has. But I think that Organ succeeds where the guinea pig films fail, because it somehow maintains interest throughout its runtime. I especially liked the plant torso hybrid. You might not know what that means, but when you watch the film, you know what I'm talking about. It's kind of hard. When you watch a lot of these movies, sometimes it seems like you're being hypocritical. Like, how could I not like Mermaid in a Manhole, but I like Organ? They're kind of similar, but I really think Organ does a better job of mixing things up and keeping things moving and changing things. Whereas Mermaid in a Manhole, to me, it was too static, and it just got monotonous after a while. Now, with that said, Organ may be too disgusting and depraved and perverted for normal viewers. One scene actually involves some nasty violence against children, which I always consider a plus in horror films, because obviously the violence is fake, and it's always nice to see kids get their comeuppance, But I enjoyed Organ, and it's significantly better than the director's other film entitled Id, which we will unfortunately get to later in this playlist. That film is horrible. But Organ I recommend. Now, Organ is widely available on DVD, so you're in luck. I actually do not have that one in my collection, but just talking about it makes me want to buy it. Maybe I'll buy it this week. Alright, next film. From our good friend Kiyoshi Kurosawa. It's called Door 3. Of course, Japanese horror film. Now, an ambitious insurance saleswoman is stalked by a mysterious client and haunted by otherworldly ghouls in this film by our good friend Kiyoshi. Now, this is probably the earliest film in this director's portfolio that powerfully exhibits his trademark style, especially the camera work and sound effects, as well as a number of elements that would serve as the foundation for his subsequent films, like, for example, ghosts, the use of shadow, suicide, which is a big topic in some of his later films, and the effects of the supernatural on the mind. So fans of this director should get a real kick out of recognizing some of these elements and assigning them to specific sequences in his future more popular works. He even breaks out the creepy plastic sheeting at one point. Door 3 does have its own personal foundation with its ubiquitous themes of seduction and society-based expectations of women to sleep their way up the business ladder. Because, you know, a lot of Kiyoshi's films have a specific theme that you can nail to each film. That's kind of the theme of Door 3. It also has a bit of a science fiction component that I recognize, which is interesting. Now, one flaw to this film, I think, is that the ending Kiyoshi really doesn't stick the ending on this one. Some of Kiyoshi's endings to his films are all-time classics, but this one, the ending's kind of weak. I didn't really find it to be that satisfying. Pacing is also a bit slow, but overall, this is a pretty cool flick, especially if you're a fan of this director. Now, DVD availability of Door 3 is that it used to be widely available on Region 2 DVD, but that is now out of print, so it's difficult to find, unfortunately. You might be able to find it, though, if you look. No subtitles on that DVD, but, you know, hey, if you're a fan of the director, seek it out. Okay. Now the next film is a cool one. Another one that's kind of weird. It's nice to get some films that are just kind of hard to, I guess, kind of hard to describe why they're so different. But there's, you know, always interesting stuff with Asian horror, man. The next film is called Baptism of Blood, Japanese horror drama hybrid. Now, a fatal skin disease forces a beautiful actress to retire from the silver screen. Decades later, this woman attempts to prolong her life through her daughter. Now, despite the title, the violence in this film is almost non-existent. I mean, you think Baptism of Blood, you're thinking truckloads, pool loads of this stuff, but it's not the case. Now, there is one outstanding surgery sequence involving archaic-looking machinery that is just really great stuff. The film is worth watching for that scene alone, and that's really the only scene of quote-unquote violence that's depicted here, really. The structure of the story is somewhat unorthodox, with two halves of the film focusing on two different characters, separated by a defining moment between them. The teen actress in particular is very good here, especially when her character gets a little bit more manipulative during the second half. Now, there are some flaws here. Some of the earlier moments come off as fairly cheesy. At least I giggled a few times, and I don't think I was supposed to. But they really don't take away much because it's such an interesting film. This is more of a dramatic, story-driven horror film with a few unexpected moments at times. And, you know, unlike a lot of other Japanese or Asian horror films, everything is very neatly wrapped up at the end of the film. You get a very detailed explanation of everything that happened. So if you're a fan of that type of thing, you know, this is another reason to check out Baptism of Blood. Now, one interesting point is that this film is based off of the works of Kazuo Umezu, the man who created The Snake Girl and the Silver-Haired Witch, which we covered from 1968. And we will cover more of his films, or I shouldn't say his films, but films based off of his writings later in this playlist. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. I basically recommend any film that's based on Umezu's works. So if you find a film and you see that it's based off of a Kazuo Umezu work, like a manga or a book, you may as well just watch it, because there's a good chance it's going to be worth watching. Now, Baptism of Blood is unbelievably widely available on DVD. Not a lot of people have seen this one, and it's been around for a while, so, you know, it's one of those ones that kind of slips through the cracks. It's kind of interesting. I liked it. I just rewatched it recently, and I think it holds up quite well. Alright, we're down to the last two videos of two movies that we're going to cover in 1996, so we're at kind of the creme de la creme of Asian horror for this particular year. In my opinion, it's kind of a tie between these two films. They're so different, it's hard to compare. And the first one is a memorable one, to say the least, and that is Rubber's Lover, a Japanese cyberpunk horror film. Now, in this film, a group of scientists use human beings as guinea pigs in their experiments to perfect psychic power. Now, from what I remember, I believe that this film is from the same director who gave us 964 Pinocchio, and that film was awful. Luckily, this film is awesome. The cinematography is in black and white, which has proven to be an advantage in terms of establishing a proper environment for Japanese cyberpunk films that rely heavily on horrific, treacherous technology. There's just that particular aesthetic and color scheme just really works when you're dealing with horrific technology, in my opinion. Scoring is also a plus here. The death scenes are just brutal and unusual in terms of how the victims are dispatched. There's one near the end of this movie that has become one of my all-time favorite death scenes. I mean, oh man, it's nasty too. It's a good one. And as an added bonus, we get lots of weird imagery that makes this subgenre so unique. I think Rubber's Lover is really chock full of really cool visuals too. One fantastically creepy scene is an awakening sequence where a person is fitted in a black rubber suit, hence the title. So you get like a nice mix here of some really nasty violent horror and some really creepy horror as well. The characters do behave hysterically at times and do scream quite a bit, which I suppose could annoy some viewers, but I do think that this feels justified given the themes of psychic power, isolation, violence, and insanity. So I mean, there's some scenes where somebody just completely loses their mind and they start screaming, which I think kind of makes sense here. And this is one of the more bizarre movies you're likely to see. It's not quite as crazy as Tetsuo the Iron Man, which is kind of in the same genre technically, but it's really weird stuff. It's low budget and it's weird. Most definitely worth watching if you're into that type of thing. Very cool stuff and definitely unique film. I always recommend this one. Some people are a bit skittish on taking up my recommendation, which is understandable, but this is a cool flick if you want something different. And Rubber's Lover is widely available on DVD, so it's there for you. Alright, so we got another good one here, our final film in this video, and that is Gakko no Kaidan 2, also known as Haunted School 2, Japanese horror film. Now, we covered the first installment in our last video, but this second entry, is it as good as the first? Well, I'm happy to say that it's actually better than the first film in this franchise, in my opinion. So, some little kids here, including the uber-cute Aki Maeda, who has done a number of horror films in her career, attend a retreat in a rural Buddhist temple and experience supernatural phenomena while exploring a local school. Now, when compared to the original film, this one I think is more fun because it's jam-packed with a variety of poltergeists and monsters. The first one had a nice variety, don't get me wrong, but this one seems to have more energy to it. Pacing is faster here than its predecessor, and special effects are used effectively, and stop motion is evident in one sequence, and as you know by now, I'm a big fan of stop motion in horror films, for the most part. But the highlight of this film is an awesome clock tower monster who is made entirely of physical effects. I mean, the crew, the production actually created this, like, huge monster thing made out of, like, I don't know what they made it out of, wood and whatever physical effects they had. And this thing comes alive and starts moving. It's really cool stuff. If you're a fan of physical effects, this movie's worth watching for the clock tower monster alone. And, as I said before, it's always fun watching little kids in creepy horror movies, so if you're a fan of that, definitely give this one a watch. This is one of the better ones. I always have fun when I watch this. I actually rewatched this particular installment more than some of the other ones. There's another installment in this franchise that's outstanding as well, but this is definitely one of my favorites. And, I did view this without subtitles, though. That's one caveat that you need to know. I don't think I've ever found this with subs, so, but, I mean, this film is fun even without them. And it is available on Region 2 DVD without subs. See, when you avoid Asian horror films that don't have subtitles, sometimes you miss some good stuff. And, again, I definitely want to do a video on why some people should watch Asian horror and action films in particular, even if they don't have subtitles, because a lot of times they're fun to watch anyway. So that completes our excursion into Asian horror from 1996. Hopefully you found it somewhat interesting. And be sure to join me in my next video in this Asian Horror Year in Review playlist, where we will explore 1997. And as always, we'll see you next time.